We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Robin Corralez. She's the Global Senior Vice President of Human Resources at PandaDoc. Robin, thanks for being on the show. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly it answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Hi, Christine. Thank you once again for having me today. My name is Robin Corralez. It's she, her, and hers. I have been in HR for over 25 years. When I was younger, I answered the question, what did I want to be when I grew up? First, as a veterinarian. And then a few years later, by grade school, I decided that I wanted to be a psychologist. Turns out my profession in HR is not too far from either of those because I spent a lot of early time in my career herding cats. And now I give away a lot of free therapy. So I pretty much stayed on point with what I wanted to be when I grew up.
There you go. So there's some commonalities between there as well. Fast forward to today. Can you tell me a little bit more about your personal journey to be a leader in human resources and people, and specifically at PandaDoc?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, when I was younger, I wanted to be a vet or a psychologist. Somehow I became drawn to this HR profession when I was in college. It was at the point where I decided that I wanted to go more into a business profession versus a clinical one. And HR is that perfect helper profession for business professionals because we're always in the middle of everything. You know, our goal as HR is to help businesses, managers, and employees like chart a path for success and chart that course. As I look back, on my journey, I think that from a young age, I probably could have predicted going into HR. My journey to tech was a little bit more convoluted. I began my career in engineering and then moved into a print advertising company that I worked for 12 years before getting into more traditional advertising and then advertising technology, eventually into SaaS here at PandaDoc.
That is a really kind of interesting kind of experience as well, and also just applying it to today in terms of helping an organization really chart their path, helping people really accomplish kind of their career goals as well. I know in preparation for our interview today, I've been researching and looking into your bio as well. And since you've joined PandaDoc, the organization has scaled at a really fast and rapid rate, especially internationally. What are the ways you're intentionally scaling company culture as the company continues to grow?
Yeah, thanks. So we've grown pretty significantly from about 250 team members when I first joined to nearly 850 now. And we've expanded into 4 new markets over that time and became a remote first company. As we scaled our organization, we recognized that there were really 3 key ingredients that were worth investing in. And the first one is transparency, the second being communication, and the third, empathy. So, as far as it relates to intentionality, we've invested a lot in our OKR framework as an organization, and we use that to maintain alignment. So our OKRs are shared publicly in Coda so that everyone at PandaDoc knows what's most important. We're also very intentional about transparency, and we have a metric site where every team member can see progress against each of our operating metrics. And that ensures that every Panda has the knowledge of how the business is performing. And when it comes to communication, we've grown and we've dispersed, right? So we can't rely on those informal communication channels that we used to. When I first joined PandaDoc, we talked a lot about all hands meetings, and our CEO was really reluctant to schedule them with any type of frequency because he didn't want to add yet another meeting and take time away from people who already had these super busy schedules. Right? But as we grew, we realized that the more frequent we have these all hands meetings, they're actually valuable to the teams and they help keep us aligned. they're still not mandatory inside of PandaDoc, but we do record them for everyone so that those who aren't able to attend can join later or, can watch later at their leisure. But that's certainly helped us with improving our communication. And then lastly, I said the investment in empathy. So we added empathy as a value right before COVID. Super timely, right? We started having these discussions early 2020 about how empathy feels like it's part of the culture, but it's not a stated value, and that we should really look at making it a stated value. Thankfully, we did, because as a result of that, decisions we made related to COVID, decisions we made related to expanding in other countries and geographies, as we faced, different political challenges and, entered in this, period of economic uncertainty now and war, we've really led with empathy. Especially in Ukraine, having empathy as a value has ensured that we lead with our people in mind first across the org.
Absolutely. Transparency and communication are really important, and also empathetic leadership is really important as well. And I think that's something that a lot of folks are talking about and really want to double down on that third one of how you really kind of lead with empathy, and how do you see empathy really manifesting across the organization, as you talked about before.
Yeah. So for me personally, I believe that leading with empathy means just leading others in the way they want to be led, right? It's pretty simple in where I come from. It means understanding that whole person that's coming to work each day and being very flexible with your own style, right? So having an empathetic leadership style means that you have no one way to lead individuals. And it also means really understanding where people are coming from and being the leader they need. Sometimes this means resisting your natural urge, right? For example, I have a ton of different styles on my team, right? Individuals with way different styles than myself. And I'm managing a team that is across 8 different time zones. Each of my team members has a different challenge that they face both professionally and personally. I tend to be a driver, so I manage really well under pressure. I can handle a great deal of stress and without becoming really overwhelmed. So my natural style is to move fast and just go get things done. That doesn't always work, right? When you're managing a team with a lot of diverse challenges. And so in my team in particular is faced every HR team, right? Not just mine. Every HR team has faced unimaginable challenges over the last 2 years. And many of my team members who are in Ukraine had their entire lives flipped upside down, and everything is completely different to them now. So, I do my best to check the news in different countries where my teams are operating in, to see what's happening. In the cases where I can't do that, or even when I can, I start my meetings with my team members asking them how are things going, right? Very personal level first before jumping into business, because I need to make sure they're in a headspace to have a business conversation and they didn't just join a one-on-one with me because it was on the calendar, if they're not mentally prepared to be able to do that. So to me, those are pieces of leading with empathy. I also try to lead with vulnerability too, right? So that individuals can understand that if they're asking for something, right? If they're asking for a pardon or they need a break, that it's okay, because I lead with that vulnerability myself, and I will very openly say, okay, guys, today's not a great day. I'm going to take a break. I need I'm not in the right headspace to have certain conversations. And that's okay, because we don't always have to be on, because we are the whole person coming to work every day. And so it's much different than the style of leadership that even myself grew up with when I was younger in my career, where check your personal life at the door and just focus on work. And so that's what I think of when I think about leading with empathy and how I manage my team. And other leaders within PandaDoc employ those same practices, right, when they're leading in global teams.
Yeah, that modeling of behavior is so important, especially from senior leaders, executives, managers, because that's where people are taking their cues from as well. You're right, people have different management styles as well, and the ways that they are enabled, empowered, and work best. And you need to check in with mindset, kind of what's going on, and the melding of our personal, professional, our entire lives too. So I think that is an important kind of key takeaway in terms of effective communication. When you're working in this kind of new world of work, what are the ways that you approach kind of big announcements or changes in a distributed, especially global workforce? If you could give an example for folks who are listening who also have an international presence.
Yeah, so this is a super timely question. Truth is, we're still learning on this one, right? Like we don't always get it right. I think the most successful changes in communications that we've rolled out, we've socialized with the teams in advance, right? So, especially with those who need to support the message. So, I mean, it's really using a lot of your core change management staple antics, right? Like, and just making sure that you apply those to an international environment too. Because a lot of times we have this out of sight, out of mind mentality. And we forget, right? Because we're all remote and we're all distributed, that we actually need to check in with other people, or we need to get some individuals on board with the communication before we make it, because we don't see them every single day. So when we socialize the messages, and typically we'll do that, like we'll do it in a Slack thread, right? Like we'll post something in a leadership channel. We'll say, hey, this is the message that we're about to share. Please post questions below before we go live with this, right? Or like post questions or concerns. It also allows the people who need to support the message be prepared with answers when they start to get them. Because inevitably, no matter what type of communication you roll out, there's always a question. There's always a follow-up question. And so, that's a little bit about like how we're doing it. But to be honest, like sometimes we're not so great at it. And sometimes we move a little too fast and we make announcements before we've socialized it. And we have like just tons of questions that fly in, and that's okay. But what we do in those situations is we'll immediately create a Google survey, and we're like, hey, we know there's lots of questions, post them here. And then we provide answers back. So it's not as it's not as fluid as socializing up front, but just because you mess up on the front end doesn't mean that you can kind of fix the communication on the back end as well, and be open to those questions.
Absolutely. And being proactive, making sure because you know there's follow up that people are best prepared to answer those questions, which are oftentimes your managers, the folks that you're talking to on a daily basis, and making sure that there's a clear level of communication and clarification as well. I would love to ask too, we've all heard the phrase people stay at companies for great managers or they leave at companies for great managers. How do you equip those people managers locally with resources to really empower their team? Are the resources you think about kind of different when you think about that global perspective too?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the biggest difference in equipping managers comes down to helping them understand cultural differences of the teams they're managing. So it's really not uncommon at all for a first level manager at PandaDoc to be managing people across multiple countries. Many of the same leadership basics apply when you're managing a distributed teams, right? So like setting clear expectations, providing opportunities for growth, having clear and consistent communication with your teams. Those are all really important. And we've designed a program to equip our managers with training on each of those skills. So we have like a PandaDoc manager training program that can be done virtually, and then it can also be done through Zoom. So we've made it async as well as live training sessions. But we've also had to provide very specific training to our leaders around leading diverse cultural teams. And in that case, it really emphasizes some key tips like refraining from using colloquial phrases that people from other countries may not be familiar with. I used one myself early on, right? I said herding cats. I would never use the term herding cats on a call with my international team members because they may not know what it is. And when I do use those types of things, oftentimes I'll pull it up on Google and then I'll do a share screen. I'm like, does this translate in your language? Like, let me tell you what this means, because I recognize that otherwise it'll be completely lost on them. Um, some other tips are, like we help train our managers that if they're talking to somebody, especially our English first, like our English speaking managers, that if they're talking to somebody who English isn't their first language, that they need to slow it down and allow the person the opportunity to understand what is being spoken if English isn't their first language, and avoids obscure words, right? Like oftentimes, the more obscure the word, the person believes the more intelligent they sound. But when you're using really obscure words and you're working with a global audience where they're not native English speakers, that can be really tough, because they can't Google it while they're talking to you and get a translator. But we also do recommend that managers write down things that are important. So whether if it's like a really key message to the team member, and it's not a CYA thing, right? It's allow this person to have the opportunity to translate it in their native language and then understand what is being said and ask questions. Because again, sometimes when you're doing spoken form of communication, not in a native language, can get lost. And so we emphasize the importance of writing things down, especially if it's really important, to ensure that and that understanding. And then we provide English lessons for all of our employees that are non-native English speakers, because it is the only consistent language that is spoken across all of PandaDoc. We've got to make sure that team members can at least have one common baseline language. And then other tips that get shared are around things like checking the news, where you have team members and understanding what's taking place in other countries. And if you can't, then starting those meetings with the personal check. So all of that is part of that diverse cultural training that we provide. And then we offer coaches. We've partnered with a company that provides on-demand coaching for any number of different topics, but it includes managing diverse teams, managing under stress, managing, like all those sort of topics. So managers who are first-time global managers can also get some help from that.
I love that. I think it also forces you to think about, what am I actually saying here? What is the goal of what I'm saying? And choosing your words kind of really carefully and really thinking about, okay, how is this going to translate? Making sure it's async friendly as well, writing things down, and also being intentional around looking at kind of the news and what's happening when you are managing across distance too is so important. I know you mentioned a few times the location of different employees around the world. I definitely want to pass the mic to you to ask how you're supporting employees in Ukraine, because I know this is something that is important to the company.
Yeah, so at the time the war began, we had about 175 employees in Ukraine. Today, we still have nearly 100 who are located there and have decided, not to leave the country. At first, we mobilized an entire support team to help evacuate the country, help them evacuate the country and move anybody who wanted to leave, and help them reach safety. We provided relocation allowance for anyone who wanted to leave. And for those who didn't, we increased the mental health allowance to $3,000 a year. So PandaDoc provides a $500 mental health allowance for every employee. But for those in Ukraine, we upped it to $3,000 if they were staying in the country, in order to make sure that they could actually take care of themselves and de-stress. And then we launched the benefit offering that I was mentioning earlier, which helps managers with managing team members. But it also, like, they have coaches that will help on everything from stress management to resilience training, managing stress, among others. And so we've hosted webinars for the teams. We've provided them with the on-demand coaching. And then we continue to support our teams who volunteer, and who volunteer with efforts for Ukraine. And then as an executive team, we had the opportunity to volunteer in Poland at a Ukrainian refugee center during our executive offsite in Warsaw. And it was both like really humbling of an experience to see Ukrainian refugees coming through. But it was also really, truly rewarding at the same time. And, we continue to, hope that this war will soon be over.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that is definitely unprecedented and something that you don't necessarily prepare for, but you need to react and really support, and really listen to how employees want to be supported as well, and really think about their day to day and what's going on outside of their job too. And I think over the past few years, I don't think anybody was preparing for a pandemic or any of the things that we have experienced. So business as usual was necessarily out the window. And now we're consistently auditing the employee experience, right? And we know that it's really important to really think about, just because this is the way always things have been done is not the way that it should be for the next 20 years. Tell me about how you've redesigned the system to be more equitable over the past few years, whether it's, a process, policy, or initiative.
I would really like to believe that what we've done related to mental health is helping to level the playing field for those people who struggle with mental health issues. Given the situation, right, over the last few years, COVID, political unrest, war, economics, ups and downs, people have really struggled with mental health. And, mental health issues have increased. So last year in 2021, we implemented a mental health allowance for team members all over the globe, where they can use it for therapy, co-payments, coaching, meditation apps, anything related to mindfulness or mental health that they so desire. And I feel like implementing this did three really big things. One, it raised the level of awareness around mental health being a priority for our teams, and normalized the issue. It gave those who are struggling some resources to actually be able to get help and find outlets in order to take care of their own mental health. And then third, I think it reduced the stigma of around mental health, because when a company is willing to call it out and address it, it makes people more comfortable discussing it and encourages those who may not normally ask for help to get help, because we call it out separately. It's like, here's your mental health allowance, because the way you feel is important to us as a company. And so those are, that's something that I would like to believe is having a big impact in shaping a process for the better.
Mental well-being, along with emotional well-being, physical well-being, is really important. And along those lines of destigmatizing the conversation, I think having that modeling behavior of managers really talking about it, having your company offer resources around it, I think really helps. And especially now is the time to really invest in your well-being as well. And I think another part of that too is around being forever learners. I know that I am personally learning every day. What was your last learning moment, if you had to pick one?
I feel like I have so many so often, especially over the last few years. Like, whoa. I've learned a ton about operating in different countries, about foreign affairs and immigration. But aside from that, like, I'm managing this really large team that scaled fast, and things break. Like, they break all the time. And I'm learning that although it's against maybe my natural nature, it's okay to step back and like sit with the problem before jumping into action. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a driver. So my natural tendency is to like move fast, get things done. And I'm recognizing that isn't always the best. Sometimes it's okay to just sit back, sit with the problem, and then I will end up yielding a better outcome as a result of that. And so like, I'm sitting with a problem right now. I won't share with the listeners, but I'm sitting on a problem right now, and I'm like, I'm not ready, right? Like, it's broken. I see that it's broken, but I'm not ready, because I know I don't have and it's not about having the right answer, because we're very much when you're scaling quickly, 80% is good enough, right? Like 80% is better than nothing. But but I'm not ready, right? And it's okay for me to sit with this problem just a little bit longer so that I get it to 80%. Because right now I might have a 30% response rate if I were to tackle the problem today.
As you're talking about it, I feel like I identify as a driver as well, because if there is a problem, something's broken, I'm like, I want to fix it yesterday or like at least by tomorrow. But sometimes you do, if not most of the time, you just, okay, let's take a step back and say, let's take a beat and think about it as well. And I think I have that is something that we share too in terms of consistently learning from that, and others around you have a different working style as well. Robin, our time has flew by today, but is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share with people who are listening, or underscoring any key insights you hope people really bring with them?
I don't think there's anything additional, but I would hope that listeners come away with an understanding that while scaling a company globally is really hard, if you're intentional about how you communicate, being transparent with your communications, and leading with empathy, you can scale your culture along with that global expansion.
Yes, you can definitely do it. It'll be challenging, but with intentionality and just a really great strategy and also room to iterate, I think it is. It's also an exciting time as well. Robin, thank you so much for sharing your experience, your journey to this work, and really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you, Christina. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to really succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.